if you give the body the spaciousness to just be with itself without anything to distract or to do, typically what people will find out is they'll notice maybe feelings of anxiety will come up. Maybe feelings of, oh, I got to get the hell out of here. This place is, they're trying to kill me. They're trying to they're stupid. They don't understand what they're doing. This is some new age bullshit. This is like all these different stories start to pop up. And it's like, bro, you're in this place. Like you can't just sit with yourself for a day. Like it's that bad.
Aaron, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. Really honored and grateful to have you here after spending so much time listening to you in my ears. It's good to finally meet you a little more formally on the podcast.
Good to meet you too, man. What does your last name mean? It's like a combination of like mirar and andar in a way. Is it like we can see, and what does andar in Spanish mean? It's like I think like to move or something like that. Mirar is to see. What does Miranda mean?
I'm not sure, honestly.
Are you some kind of Spanish speaking background? What's the background?
Most people think I'm Spanish, but I actually am Italian. I went to
we gotta look this up.
Yeah, let's do it.
Bro.
I went to a town in Italy where my grandparents are from, and every place in the town was the Miranda pizza shop, the Miranda funeral home, the Miranda grocery store. It was kind of crazy to see. But
Italian and Spanish are very similar languages. Yeah, andar or andar in Spanish is walk, so like move around, and then mirar or mirar is to look or to see. So that's kind of interesting. That's like a whole. I wrote a whole chapter in my book about the value of taking a walk and looking up into the trees and the clouds and the neurological, physiological effects that has. So that's a great name, Miranda.
It's one of my favorite things to do, walk around and look around.
Got to do it.
But I figured we'd start this podcast off with you and at a place in your life that I haven't heard any podcast discuss, which is, this is your words here. Funny story. I could have been a convicted felon, still locked up to this day. I was once at the wrong place at the wrong time in Northern California and was charged with multiple felonies for a cannabis-related crimes, which you actually had nothing to do with. You were locked up and placed in a max security room referred to as C block with about 40 other felons for about 8 days, some of which who had committed murder and violent offenses.
Yeah,
what in the world was that experience like?
Where did you even find that? I don't even remember talking. I mean, I know I've talked about that. I think I talked about it on like the Mind Pump podcast. Where did you do?
We do a research around here.
Well done. Yeah, that happened. That was like, I don't know how long ago, 12 years ago, 11 years ago, something. I was on a rock climbing trip. I lived in Colorado at the time, and I was going from there up to British Columbia. I was meeting some people up there, and along the way, my brother was staying at this house in California, and I stayed there for a little bit. I trimmed some weed, as one does when you're like your early 20s. I was literally there for I think I was there for 2 days or something. It was just like a stop through. I was like, cool, I'll trim some weed, I'll make my way up to British Columbia and climb some rocks. And I was going to make a joke about like crack rocks or something, but it wasn't. I didn't know how to connect it. And yeah, I woke up. It was like day 2, or maybe I was there for 3 days. Like maximum I was there for 3 days, and woke up in the morning, and there's like a helicopter flying over the house, and it was like a whole situation. And so the issue was, this house that I was staying at, they were like pretty normal. Like California, Northern California is like growing cannabis is very normal. And they were a little bit over the legal limit, but like not even really. And then like the write-up, it was like the possession of illegal fireworks, and they had like a pistol, and they had like 40 grand cash. It was like not impressive what they actually had at the house. But the thing was, on that property and all throughout California, there's Mexican cartel that are like, the way that they do it is like not good. I don't know a lot of the details, but they had, I don't know how many, it was like 5,000 plants or something, like a lot of plants. And on this property, which was like 400 acres, it was on the edge of that was happening. So the police treated anybody that was there, which in this 2 or 3 day period was me, and the people that actually lived there, as though like they were growing 5,000, 6,000 illegal like cartel plants. And so I got the full treatment. It was a very special experience. I learned a lot about the criminal justice system, and you know, I got the whole thing, like shackles around my hips and around my feet, and you know, shuffled around, got to put in those little like steel enforced car situations. Really got looked at like as though I was a criminal. At the time I had long hair as well. I was like a young, you know, rock climbing, Rolfing, which is a form of manual therapy, personal training hippie guy. And yeah, I got the full treatment, man. It was very interesting. And then thankfully, you know, it took a while to get bailed out because you need somebody from around there to come and bail you out. Finally found somebody to do that. And then, you know, 5-6 months later or whatever, they had the actual like court thing, drove all the way back from Colorado again, back to California, showed up, and the judge was like, yeah, we don't have anything against you. Like, you're fine. It's, you know, you're good. I was like, you could have fucking texted me, bro. Like, I didn't need to come out here for this. So anyway, so that was that. I'm glad that worked out.
You come out of that experience, what do you learn?
Well, criminal justice system is pretty deranged. You know, I've done a podcast with a guy called Harry Grammer, who he's really big in the world of just how would you say, like reorienting the criminal justice system, particularly for adolescents, around, instead of it being like punishment, more into like actual rehabilitation. You know, and treating them with respect and giving them better clothes and giving them better education, and actually saying like, cool, like no one chooses crime because crime is their preference. You choose crime because you don't feel like you have any other options. You know, and so someone that's in some delinquent scenario, they're there because they don't typically have better options. And then I think in an ideal world, there's certain situations like or institutions in Europe, from my understanding, I've seen some documentaries, I don't know a lot about it. But they're really much more big on actually rehabbing the inmates, and they can actually earn money while they're in jail, and they get an education, and they get a vocation, and they come out and they're like, cool, I have a savings, I have a new education, you know, I've been off drugs or whatever it is, like I'm ready to actually integrate into society. Whereas in the United States, you know, I don't remember, it's been a while since I did the podcast with Harry, but our recidivism rate is obscenely high. Recidivism being the word for returning back to jail, like you go to jail and then you go back. In the United States, it's just this revolving door situation. And one of the many issues with it is, from my understanding, many of our jail and prison systems are actually privately owned, and they garner tax dollars by actually having inmates. So an inmate actually almost serves as a customer. And so if you have an empty jail, that's actually problematic for your business, which is insane and unacceptable. That's like a system that we exist in. And so it's not so much, it's more like, my experience in that was more, it felt like naughty adult daycare. There wasn't, it's just a bunch of dudes ranging, most people were there for drugs. But like the guy that slept above me, everybody was very nice, to me at least. But he slept above me. He showed me his like rap sheet. It's like this huge book, you know, it was like a part of it was like murder and like all these different things. But they're just, you know, hanging out, playing cards, watching TV. Food was pretty good. Food wasn't too bad. Playing basketball. I was doing like yoga and handstands and stuff. People were enamored by like, who the hell is this freaking, you know, Colorado bearded hippie Jesus looking figure, you know, doing handstands in the jail yard. Like what the freak is going on? Yeah, that was it. It was strange, man. Life is strange.
Takes you on crazy, crazy roads.
Yeah.
I'm
not comparing myself to Jesus, but I just literally looked like I had like long hair. I was like,
no,
you know,
understood.
Yeah, in appearance, not in like, you know, spirit or anything of the sort.
Isn't it funny how often we feel the need to correct ourselves, especially when we're speaking so often in the world? You know, I've done almost 300 podcasts. You've done over 420. Like, there's a level of like, what do you think that is? I think it's like almost fear of being canceled, almost like what from my perspective. What do you think it is?
I think economy of language is important. I don't always do the best job with it, as you already heard in this conversation. I think meticulousness is valuable. I think it's something that one learns through being recorded for hundreds or thousands of hours. Early on, I wouldn't recommend anyone listen to my podcast early on. I don't even know how to delete old episodes, but I'm always like, bro, like really don't listen to it because it's so bad. And I'm so just outlandish and so like unhinged in a way, which is to some degree is fine, but it's just like a lack of self-awareness. And I'm talking over people, talking too much. It's just too much. And so I think that the awareness, tracking one's self and being like, oh, like how could that be taken? Okay, let's kind of plane that out a little bit, and make sure it's not quite taken like Aaron said, he is Jesus, it's like, I could see how that could go in that direction. Let's just make sure, dot the I's, cross the T's kind of thing. I think it's a fine trait.
Yeah. Well, one conversation in which you were very open and vulnerable, and I really appreciate it as a listener, was the conversation you had with your mother during November 2020. Mm-hmm. And your ability to just ask questions, to wonder why you were the way you were in certain aspects, and to be able to navigate with, I don't know, compassion and also directness. I really appreciate it as a listener. So, like, why do you want to interview your mother? Because I think it can be a helpful practice for anybody. And what do you learn from that experience?
Yeah, that's another conversation that I wouldn't encourage people to listen to be honest. I think one, it would be, upon doing it originally, I wasn't doing it with the intention to actually have it be a published episode. I was doing it just almost like playing house in a way. And I would recommend anyone does that with their parents, especially because, your parents, they're going to transition out of their bodies at some point, probably sooner than you. And so if you could go back and have a recording of you and your mom or dad or grandpa or grandma or anybody, they're going to die, in some amount of decades or years, and be able to come back and have that conversation and listen to yourself and observe your relationship to them. Because when you're in relationship with someone, sometimes it's hard to be able to read the ingredients while you're inside of the can kind of thing. So you're just, cool, this is my mom and I'm her son or daughter, and that's it, period. I got it, wrapped up. And it's like, well, she's also, a employee someplace. She's also a wife. She's also a little girl. She's also an elderly woman. She's also, afraid and happy and proud and ashamed. And she's so many things, and she probably has some spiritual components that are harder to maybe speak on, but there's a lot of levels and layers to your mom, or your dad, so I think that is just a great thing, like an opportunity that people have. So I'd invite people to do that if they're into it. And something different happens as well when you're doing an intentional, quote unquote, like interview or recorded conversation, because you are a bit more meticulous with your expression. It's kind of like writing a book. You're writing a book is kind of inconvenient in a way, because once you write it, it's like, okay, I guess this is really what I think, whereas, so a podcast interview is like that, just a little bit less, you can pretty much delete it. It's really hard to delete a book, but you get a little bit more of that, like, this is how I feel. This is really how I feel. You're not just these throwaway word vomit stuff. It's like, no, like on the record, and also you have a more intention to ask more, just intentional questions, and intentionally listen, so I think it's a great practice for anybody to do, honestly. I don't know if you had what was there a question with that, or more just like, why did I decide to do that?
Well, first part was why you decided to do that, and that was a great answer. And then I'm curious how it's imprinted on you 2 years after now, sitting in December of 2022.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think seeing my mom, I think having more respect for her, I think probably is a thing. Like you see, that's probably something. If you start to see your mom or dad, if they're just in that mother-father kind of archetypal role, you see them through a certain filter and lens. But when you start to listen to them as a friend, or in this case, as a host and a guest, that's something. If you're having a guest on your show or whatever, you're like, cool, I really want to offer you the time and space, and I want to bring the best out of you. And so I think with that, just that subtle little medium shift with the conversation with my mom, I feel like it brought something different out of her as well. And just like a different depth, I would say, than I'm commonly accustomed to. And sometimes you can tap on certain levels of depth with yourself, with another person, and then you typically will get distracted, or maybe you have some kind of like subconscious avoidant tendencies that you may or may not realize, and you're like, cool, like on to the next thing. You're like, okay, cool. We kind of like, shimmied ourselves up. We nudge ourselves up against the side of some deeper part that's been there for a long time, but we kind of like skirt around. Like, oh, cool. We kind of touch it. We see it's there. And then like, okay, let's get out of here. We'll go, let's go play kickball or go make a sandwich or whatever. Whereas if you have like, cool, this is 90 minutes. We're just going to keep on wading through those deeper waters. And it's really amazing what comes out. A relationship with a mother and a father or daughter, any those versions. It's deep, man. It's crazy how deep it is. It's worth investing yourself into a deeper investigation of it, I think.
Have you done those exercises or interviews or recordings with your brother or your dad or anyone else close in your family?
I did my dad a while ago, but I didn't release it. Same, really good. Yeah, it was. I did that one probably like 5 years ago or something like that. But it was great getting to just talk to him as like a man, and as like hearing all of his stories and hearing just like, just giving the spaciousness to really deeply listen to your parents. I think it's probably more rare than most people would realize, or maybe it's just me. But, for me, I think like having that spaciousness to really intentionally listen, and really intentional, like you're not getting on your phone. You're not saying, oh, cool, Mom, that's awesome. And then like you're swiping on Tinder or whatever. You're like, you're really there. Something special happens with that. That's the same reason why I just did a darkness retreat thing that you probably know about, I presume, based off your research. And that's an example of that. You just keep on sitting with it, or I've done a Vipassana meditation thing where you just pretty much for the most part sit and meditate for 10 days. You have like breaks in between, but then you do this hour sits and then you take a break and an hour sit. You just do that all day, starting at like 4:30 in the morning. That's the same, very similar thing where it's like you get to a certain layer of stuff, in like Buddhist terms, they call it, samskaras is a term for it, which Sanskrit translation, from my understanding, not that I obviously speak Sanskrit at all, but pretty sure it means impression. So we'll have certain impressions of memories and such in our lives that really imprinted upon us, typically because they were hard. It was like traumatic. So trauma, just to put definition on the word, could be defined as some type of experience that was too much for you to process at the time. So you just kind of bypass it, repress it, stuff it down, no, too much. Anytime that happens in a person's life, you could pretty much guarantee, if it's not actually fully masticated, digested, processed, circulated back out, that contraction and almost like dent in that manifests itself in perhaps like literally the tonicity of your muscles. Maybe you'll have a contraction around your muscles around your throat or your diaphragm, or maybe your pelvic floor muscles. It's like literally a muscular contraction of sorts. Where you're like, oh no, it doesn't just go away. And so in those from like a Buddhist philosophical terms, from my understanding, a limited bit that I know, understand about Buddhism, or like going through those experiences, if you just sit with yourself long enough, all of those old samskaras, impressions, they just start to come to the surface.
Why?
And I think because your body has a certain level of this is me, I don't know, but your body has a certain level of technology of it. It's like a purgative system. It's a healing system. And when you have stuff, so let's just call it these impressions, like these contractions that you may have had from childhood. Maybe there was some type of thing where you were hurt, you were afraid of being hurt, you were left alone, you didn't feel loved, you felt any of that stuff where it was really like, oh. And then you build around that. For me, it was like getting really into bodybuilding, maybe being semi-precocious when it comes to like studying and such. I became personal trainer when I was 16, and I, was aware that I'm 16 years old teaching adults. They're paying me to like how to be fit. So that translated to me being like, cool, I'm going to read everything I possibly can and just have like this voracious appetite to learn. And I'm also going to get as big as I possibly can. And I'm going to do this as fast as I possibly can. Part of that was a feeling of like, okay, I'm not enough. Okay, I need to figure out how to be more enough, or I'm stupid, or I don't know enough, or I'm not big enough, or I'm, all of these different things. So pack. But that doesn't necessarily address the root. It just starts to create like almost like a shield around those initial quote unquote points of trauma. And I think that the body has a certain level of technology to it of sorts. It's obviously isn't scientific. But if you give it time with itself, then it will start to process. If you're perpetually distracted, it'll keep those parts down. So similar thing, if you're in that parasympathetic side of the nervous system, they call it the rest, digest, restore side of the nervous system. When you're in that side, you're like, you get a full exhalation, you can relax your visual muscles, you can actually chill. Then suddenly it opens up space for peristalsis and digestion and menstruation and all of these internal processes, because your body gets the memo that, cool, you have the space to start to process and heal. If you're more in that sympathetic side of the nervous system, your body says, cool, great, love your menstruation, love your digestion. There's a threat. We need to get blood out of the viscera and into the appendicular, or into the limbs, into the legs, into the arms, because you need to be ready to like either fight, run away, whatever the thing is. We'll address all those deeper parts later. And so if you give the body, so that's more of like a scientific lens, and like jumping back to like the Buddhist stuff. If you give the body the spaciousness to just be with itself without anything to distract or to do, typically what people will find out is they'll notice maybe feelings of anxiety will come up. Maybe feelings of, I got to get the hell out of here. This place is, they're trying to kill me. They're trying to like this. They're stupid. They don't understand what they're doing. This is some new age bullshit. This is like all these different stories start to pop up. And it's like, bro, you're in this place. Like you can't just sit with yourself for a day. Like it's that bad that you can't actually stand the concept of just being with yourself for a day, and you think that that's okay. And maybe it is okay. I'm not saying it's not okay, but like I would think as a general baseline, it would behoove most people to be like, oh yeah, like I totally could just be in my own space for a day. I don't need to scroll my phone looking at notifications, or I don't need to like fucking work out and get a pump or something like that. I literally can just like be and observe. Like there's a lot of stuff to observe. And if you allow yourself to be in that state, I think the body goes into this kind of technological process of sorts where it says, oh, okay, cool. You have space to process old stuff. Cool. Let's do it. And then it comes to the surface and it does things to you, changes your blood pressure, changes pupil dilation. It has like physiological responses. It might make you feel afraid, might make you feel anxious, might make you feel guilty, might make you feel all these different things. You want to run away from it. You want to stop it. You keep sitting with it. sit all the way through it, and then eventually it does something where it's almost like it comes out, and that would be how they describe it in Vipassana meditation, at least.
What do you think came out when you finished the silent retreat?
Or just like emotion. I've been sitting with that. It was, and I'm not like boasting about this by any means. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Like, sat in a dark room for, I went in Wednesday evening and came out Monday morning. So they bring you food each day, and there's like a bathtub and whatnot. So I could like cold plunge and take hot baths and whatnot. And, so I don't think it's that big of a deal by any means, but it's the opportunity to do something like that. It just makes you really exposed to yourself, because because through the day, I mean, I'm like an addict, largely. Like much of my personality is very, very addict-like. And so
I want to cut you off real quick here because I want to come back to this point about addicts. You said once, to me, if a person is an addict, it's such a selfish act. And when you said that, it was like a light bulb in my head that helped me understand my own behavior in my past so much. But we'll come back to it. Yeah,
it's a selfish act. Yeah, I mean it is. And then if you're selfish, you're lonely.
Yep.
Like, that's the paradox. The person and then there's, all sorts of research and studies and all that. Like people feel better when they give stuff away.
Always.
So again, this is more, I think there's like a certain level of technology to the human. Like one of those is we feel better in cooperation. So the concept of, Darwin, all the Darwin stuff of only the strong survive and all of that stuff is like, yes, but the reason that humans are the species that they are is their capacity for communication and cooperation. That's it. The human alone is kind of shitty. Like, it's not like the human out in the woods, it just pretty much dies. Like, it's not that cool. But the human in a tribe, whoa, okay, now we're really talking. Now we're taking down woolly mammoths, and now it's like we're building weapons and technology, and now we're sending satellites into space. But no one person built a satellite. No one person built this computer. It is all run on cooperation. Without cooperation, without connection, without community, we are not a very impressive species at an individual level. And so when the human goes into more of like a very individualistic place, I think it goes against, there's a term for some of the diseases that people experience in modern days, diseases of mismatch. So like our bodies, our biology is attuned to being more congruent with nature. We walk, we get sunlight, we get darkness, we're grounding, we're drinking probably decent water, we're eating food that comes from close to the ground. We have a relationship to the food. We have a relationship to our, Dunbar number, 150 people, tribal situation. That's like baseline, we're connected to the teat of life force for the human. As you start to drift away from any of those fundamental aspects, I think you start seeing these, such as a person that lives in a high rise alone. Most of their communications coming through their cell phone or computer screen. Most of their day, they're under artificial, alternating current, flipping lights throughout the day, or they're breathing air-conditioned air, which has an effect on the ionization of the air, just affects like the quality. They're around a bunch of radiation in various different forms. Radiation itself, not bad, but who knows what the hell's happening with like Wi-Fi and just having your cell phone up against your testicles all day, or, ovaries or whatever, is weird. And so those diseases of mismatch are a product of like, we're these biological creatures that are we've kind of pulled ourselves out of our own biology in a way. And, weird stuff starts to happen. I don't know where I was going with that. I got so excited about what was I talking about?
No, we were talking originally about the darkness retreat and how you realized a lot of the things that you were doing in the day-to-day reminded you of an addict.
Yeah. So the addicts, so the addict, selfish individualism part, that was the thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think a part of the disease of mismatch would be our transition into individualism and into nuclear homes and nuclear families, and your kids just exposed to their mom and their dad, and now they're homeschooled, and they're afraid of vaccines, or they're for the vaccines, or there's all this political stuff. It's like, and we just kind of get, okay, I'm afraid, so I'm going to pull back. I'm going to get closer, and more secular, more into my or insular rather. And then the human's like, oh no, like that's, we need community, we need cooperation, we need connection. And so for I think probably most people's experience, but my experience, the sadder I am, or the more disconnected I feel, the more individualistic typically I am, and the more engaged I am in my own social media and saying like, oh, what's going on here? And more engaged I am in my own money and my own, like all of these different things. How do I protect me? Whereas the more open I feel and the more like connected I feel, the more I'm like, how can I help you? I'm good. How can I help you?
So can you help bridge the gap between being alone for 5 days, which is all about you, and how that actually helped you give, or it helped you in general, because it's so much time with yourself? One might think, based on what you just said, that it would be harmful to do that. But from my own experience, spending a lot of time alone, it was incredibly helpful, and I assume it was for you as well.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good point. Well, but you don't have with the alone. So there's different levels of alone, so there's alone and distracted, and alone and avoidant, and then there's alone and just being with all of the different parts that you perhaps have never even realized that you could be with. You didn't even realize they were there. And so that's what happens in intimate relationship as well. I believe intimate relationship will like really, really do that to you. But yeah, I think that would be the big difference. If you feel alone, or you feel like lonely, and you are trying to quell that sensation through avoidant strategies, social media, whatever, making money stuff, or just whatever your things are, different patterns, typically like compensations. Yeah, that would be more of that individualistic alone thing. But being alone in a darkness thing, or vipassana, or just doing your own little meditation thing, go out in the woods, go camp with yourself for a couple nights. It creates the space for me. It was as though there was deeper levels of my own personality, my just access to emotions and feelings that in a typical day-to-day, because I would be more avoidant of those sensations because they feel uncomfortable. Maybe it was, for me, it's mostly like anxiety and sadness would be the ones that I'm like, ugh, like, okay, how do I do like not anxiety and sadness?
Is that because of your mom? Because she always gave such a cheerful look to everything, always a positive look, that you suppressed that part of yourself? Yeah,
that's a good question. I don't know. I don't actually. I have a therapy appointment right after this. So this is we're gonna be doubled up. I don't know. I don't know where that comes from exactly, but that's. Yeah, I think feeling like maybe a little ashamed in a way to not have my shit together, or not like have it all together, which is congruent with my mom's general approach, from at least my projection, and I think she would largely agree. But that was that opportunity. I would recommend anybody, if they're open to something like that, go out, there's actually, I might be doing another thing called I think they call it like a vision quest is what they call it, or something like that. But you go out in the woods and they give you, I think, a gallon of water each day or so. You have like 3 gallons of water, and you go out and you just sit with yourself in the woods for several days. I don't remember how many days exactly. And then they have like this integration thing, and it's a whole process. I think Tim Corcoran is the name of the guy that I'll be doing that with in the spring. But if you have an opportunity to do something like that, like it does something to your relationships and your experience with the world. Like you don't know what you don't know. And for the most part, like you listen to, so many different people, they'll be 50 years old, 40 years old, whatever, like older people. And they're like, man, until I had that experience, I didn't know what was going on. And it's like, shoot, like as a young person, you think, okay, I mean, the dude's 29 years old. They must have it all figured out. They've got a hot girlfriend. They've got some money. Like they've got a car that's cool. Like they did it. Like they're pretty much done. But meanwhile, they're still awaiting that, like a quote unquote, like awakening situation or rite of passage or, any of those things. So I personally would recommend people like actively seek out those like rites of passages of sorts, because the experience with yourself after that, typically it leads to like a greater sense of depth, and there'd be no way for you to actually even understand that until you actually go through the experience, like viscerally have the experience compared to reading a book. To be able to seek out those experiences, what happened in like the darkness situation, and I'll shut up and after this because I realize I've been like monologuing, but
no, I love
there was
a
lot of the things that came up for me were literally it was like actualizing the things that I would read about from people like Ram Dass or Alan Watts or whatever, in certain parts of like attachment, for example, so day-to-day life, you could say like, oh yeah, don't be too attached, bro. That's too much, but don't go so far that you're disassociated either. So be actively engaged, but not attached. And that's like very easy to say. But when you are in that circumstance where you're alone in the woods, you got nothing to do, you're sitting in a vipassana, you got nothing to do other than just be with yourself, or you're sitting in a dark room, nothing to do, or maybe you're doing ayahuasca or whatever your thing is, or just in some stressful situation, you just have to be with it all the way through it. That non-attachment to that thought that's literally making you feel insane. Like you feel like you're going to explode and you need to like run out of the room because you can't, it's so much. And in that situation, it's like, okay, how can I lean into this? How can I actually open myself up to this experience more? How can I start to reduce my judgment of this sensation as being bad and more just observe objectively what this sensation is, which is it feels like tension. It feels like, oh, I'm noticing my blood pressure is going up. Oh, I'm noticing my eyes are kind of getting a little like scattery. Like, wow, I'm like, it feels like anxiety. Oh, wow. Okay. Now it feels like, oh, it's shifted. Okay. Now it feels like sorrow. Oh, it feels like grief. Oh, I feel a weight in my abdomen. So to be able to be in that place of really, in a non-judgmental, very objective, and also very compassionate way in the observation of your experience, that's the stuff you read about in the books. And then you do a thing like that, and you're like, oh, this is why they wrote about that, because it's the only way to actually move through these hard sensations.
Yeah, there's one thing to read something, another thing to experience it.
Yeah.
You mentioned the rite of passages before, and I'm curious for you personally, what were the most important rite of passages that you've been through? And also, what are some rite of passages or a rite of passage you recommend other young men or other young people to go through in their life?
Intimacy is the hardest one for me. Yeah, particularly, with a woman. That's like, bro. That's like, I think that for me is the highest ante of all the different things. Like you can do hard things. You sit in a cold plunge for longer than is healthy and become hypothermic, or you could do any of the other stuff that I mentioned, or you could eat, a bunch of grams of mushrooms or something in a dark room and, see dragons and fucking feel like you're going to die or whatever. But that's all very temporary and very like, it's like jumping off of a tall waterfall. You just be like, okay, like screw it, just close your eyes, just jump in. But I think the persistence of a relationship, to me, I think that's like, for a man, is one of the most high leverage evocations you could endure, I would say. It would, like, evocations, in the sense it evokes, for me at least, and probably a lot of other men, it evokes you to want to get your life together. It evokes you, especially if the woman's like, what are we doing here? Are we going to have kids? Are you going to get me a wedding ring? Are you going to actually let go of the idea of you're going to bang every random hot chick that, like, passes through your Tinder profile or whatever, and we're just kind of like, this is cool for now, bro. Like, that's it. Really, like, it does a squeeze of sorts to, I think, the consciousness of a guy. And so that's something that I found to be probably, like, the biggest, I don't know, just effector, I would say, of, like, my heart, and also my lifestyle. So that's, I would say, like, be willing to be vulnerable. Be willing to, quote unquote, open your heart, which sound, especially if I was talking to myself and I was like 22, I'd be like, I don't really know what you're talking about. And you're some new age freaking weirdo. Like, what are you, like, open my heart? That doesn't, give me some science. And then you go to like Heart Math Institute, and you can actually measure the magnetic frequencies that are coming from the heart. I think it projects out like 12 feet or so. From the brain, I think it's like 3 or 4 feet. So you can actually measure, there's quantitative measurements of what's happening around the heart and the organs and the brain and all that stuff. So, and it changes based off of your present state. So the idea of, like, feeling like open-hearted, or feeling like protected or closed or contracted or closed down, any of that, there's literally quantitative objective measurements from an electromagnetic perspective of what that looks like. So there is that as well. But again, it's one of those things that I think it has to be like an actual embodied experience, and you have to get your heart broken, and you have to just get smashed and, like, pulled through rocks and feel hopeless and helpless and insane. Like, I was at one point in love with a girl from Nepal. I don't remember what the word for in love with, but essentially it means, like, it's like, I'm insane for you. Like, it's like not good. It's like, love is like, it changes everything. So I would say that would probably be the greatest rite of passage for me, and, like, the most powerful, is a girl for me. Cause I identify as heterosexual. But that, I'd say, is the gnarliest of all of the hard things a guy could do, would actually be open himself up to a woman. And particularly open himself up to a woman and start getting into the point of being with the possibility of having a child, and being with the possibility of, like, you're the quote unquote one. Like, I'm going to actually push all my chips into you and not be 98% here with you, but I have my foot kind of out here on the ready. Like that, to close that up and say, like, let's make life together. That's, probably like the gnarliest.
Do you think that's harder today?
Oh, for sure.
Any other time in human history, because of, you literally can open an Instagram app and see someone or see something that is possibly attainable, whereas our grandfathers did not have to deal with that because they were going to the store. That doesn't make it right, wrong, anyway, but it's almost more difficult for a man to be fully in today versus any other time in human history, which is just a fascinating concept.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the having the, like, Chris Rock, he has like a joke about a man's only as faithful as his options. And so when you're in like which, whatever, I mean, infidelity is very high in relationships. I just did a podcast with a girl called Wednesday Martin, who she wrote a book called Untrue. It's all about how women actually engage in infidelity like much more than is proposed typically, particularly in long-term relationships, particularly if the partners live together. And there's, a lot of the statistics or ideas or concepts around, like, men just have this rapacious desire to spread their genetics, and women just want to be like safe and, make a baby and stay home. Men's is like, no, like, that's not it. So yeah, people I think that the story of what people think relationships are and think relationship is and all of that oftentimes is not actually consistent with at least like the statistical truth of what's going on with relationships. And there's a lot of dishonesty with ourselves, dishonesty with our partners, fear of like losing love. So you just won't communicate the way that you feel. You just keep it kind of bottled up, and eventually it's the same thing as the samskara stuff. You keep it bottled up and you don't feel safe to be able to communicate, and actually, in a non-judgmental way, be able to communicate the way that you feel. And you just say, cool, I'm just going to stuff that down. I think typically, it's going to lead to it's starting to fester and stew, and it comes up in like quote unquote toxic ways, and then ends up probably ruining your relationship or whatever it may be. So being vulnerable and open about even parts of yourself that you might feel like uncomfortable to communicate with, or maybe like ashamed to communicate with someone that you feel really vulnerable with. And it's like you really value their opinion. That's hard stuff, man. But if you do it, it's also very healing, I think.
You've said before, it's hard to emote. I don't understand love. I don't understand relationships. I don't understand going to family reunions and people seeming like they love each other and feeling home and feeling safe. How does that quote resonate with you today versus I don't know when you said that, but
that was from when I was a kid. And when I grew up, I was like I think probably a lot of people feel this way, but I felt like very different in a way. I felt like everyone kind of like knew, like they belonged. And, you go to family reunion thing or whatever, whatever the thing is. And it seemed like everybody was kind of like, they got it. Like they love each other. They feel like they're happy. They're very emotive and they're hugging and like all this stuff. And it's like, wow, they're talking to each other. And I was just very, like, I had this uncle that was kind of a dick, I think, but he called me Mumbles. Because I didn't talk much. I just kind of would like look around and I just kind of like, what do I do with my hands? And like, who are these people?
And it's fascinating because now your job in some respect is to podcast, which is the opposite of mumbling. Like you're a very clear, eloquent speaker. So it's interesting how that happens.
I don't think that's always the case, but yeah, I mean, but that's what you do. Typically, I also train people from like for movement and physicality and all that stuff. But I might come from a background of feeling, tons of injuries and imbalances, and had my shoulders have both dislocated probably 50 times. I've dislocated my ankle, had like chronic back pain for years and years and years, had all sorts of issues. And so then it's like, okay, let's like make this my vocation, teaching people about this stuff. If you see a psychologist, they're probably psychologists because they're kind of nuts, and they just, or like a coach, relationship coach on the internet, or a relationship counselor. They're probably that because it's been so devastatingly challenging for them. And now they just know everything about the topic because they come from, their own problems with it. Generally speaking, I think that's the way it goes.
Yeah. And so for you, it's like, when did you feel or start feeling in place in your own body, with your own family, with situations in general? I think it's one of the most heartwarming situations is when you can feel comfortable with you by yourself. And you can go into any situation and you're like, wow, like I feel whole. Whatever happens right now, I feel good because I'm okay with me. It's like, I wish that for everyone. So what was your journey like to go from not feeling like you understood love or relationships or out of place to, it seems like you feel like in place with your body. It seems like you're very calm. You're at peace with yourself. I mean, obviously this is just my projection to you. I don't know if you resonate with it, but if you do, I'm curious how you bridge that gap.
Yeah, let me plug my computer. I'm seeing it's unplugged. Yeah, I don't think that I haven't arrived anywhere. That's for sure. I haven't. I mean, I still notice myself going through all sorts of addictive-ish behavior, which would, addict is like, you'd have to define addict. I would say addict would be something for me at least, would be compulsively, like unrelentingly going through the motions of a behavior or a thought cycle or anything of the sort, and it's not actually serving your greatest good. And it's, you could be addicted to some kind of shitty sugary food, or addicted to maybe too much caffeine, or addicted to porn, or addicted to drugs or whatever. But if you just drink some caffeine because it makes you feel good, or use some whatever illicit substances, but you use it in actually a controlled way, you're like, oh yeah, it's like the tool belt of substances. Like, we understand how and when to engage with them, and we're like mature about it. Those are very different scenarios. And so for me, most of my addicted behavior will probably be like around thoughts, and then probably compulsive behavior around like cell phone, which for me mostly I think comes out to like love. And that's a part of what I've been doing with therapy and all the things. Is I think that's probably one of the parts that is the most resonant for me, is like a yearning for I guess love, you could say, like validation, like, okay, like, cool. Like, I will not be left alone. And, I will continually have love from whoever. And if I feel like there's a threat where it's like, oh, the love is being pulled away, I start to kind of go through these behaviors of like, okay, how do I like restructure these quote unquote sensations of love, which oftentimes are like, empty and don't actually provide much value. It's like junk food versions of love. And then within that, the addict is going to have generally what's like more Buddhist terms would be like hungry ghost is like a term from that, which also there's a book from Gabor Mate, who I've done several podcasts with him. He's a sweetie. He's had a book called Myth of Normal just come out. He has another book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. Concept of hungry ghost, which is very common in the world that we live in, I would say, but it's this mythological creature that has this endlessly large stomach and then a small gullet, and they can never feel satiated. They can never really feel completely fed. And so that's, many modern people, me for sure, going through like this hedonic treadmill is another term, where you just keep on, needing more. And then you get, you feel satiated for a second, you get that dopamine hit, all things, you're like, and then the dopamine levels drop below baseline. And now you're like, okay, how do I get back? That is addict behavior, and so that's something that I personally still navigate. I don't think that I'm like out of that or in any kind of like transcendent place to provide any real advice on anything in that way. If I'm really honest.
I appreciate the honesty. When did you feel, or when do you feel the most love for yourself independent of your addict behavior?
Love for myself. It comes in waves. I mean, I think that's the thing, is that's like, I think that I can also have the tendency of being overly hard on myself, I would say. And I just pretty much, my default mode is I just flip to responsibility. Like, cool, like it's all me. Like, I did it. If there's anything happening in my world, then I am responsible for it because I at least opened myself up to this existing. So for me, it's easier for me just to default into I'm responsible, because I think it kind of gives me a sense of control. Mm-hmm. I have like an allergy to victimization. So anything that feels victimizing at all, I'm just like, I'm like, no, like not interested. Don't want that. Like, I did this. Like, this is me. So that to me, I think is my general tendency with that. But yeah, what was the question again?
When did you feel most love for yourself, independent of your addict behavior?
Oh yeah, so I think it comes in waves, and so that's the thing of feeling like.
What's the wave? Describe a wave for me in which you did feel that you weren't involved in addict behavior and you really did genuinely were like, wow, I love how I'm operating right now. I feel whole with myself, or I feel at peace. Are there any moments from your life that stand out? I
mean, for me, most of those sensations come from after doing hard work. So typically after doing something where I'm like, that was good, like, hell yeah, like that was dope. So it's, for me, it's typically the waves and cycles come as a product of a lot of output. And so that's like, I worked really hard. I built the fence. I worked really hard. I created this, we just finished this online program thing. We were just going through like the sales page and everything today and like going through all the videos. And I'm like, that's dope. Like that was, we had a vision for it. And then we set out, we filmed freaking 13 different times and then had to redo it and this and that. Is just like so much. And then we get the finished product. You're like, that's cool. That feels gratifying. I think that for me, most of those cycles, it really is a product of investing work in first. And then that gratification of like, so that's, I think that probably a lot of the cycles of maybe like compulsive or addictive behavior that I might exhibit oftentimes is more a product of me having all of this energy and quote unquote potential, but not knowing exactly how to harness it or direct it. And then it can start to build up and create almost like this internal fire. And if you don't utilize that fire for something of value that actually feels fulfilling, it will burn you up. And that's why the most creative people oftentimes are a little crazy, and the people that create like really amazing stuff, they sometimes end up being drug addicts. They sometimes end up being depressed. They sometimes end up like all of the things, and they're brilliant. I'm not saying I'm any of that. I resonate with some of those parts of like, oh, interesting. So it's really, I think the game is figuring out how do you channel that internal energy, you could say. And if you have a good avenue to channel it, it'll probably be really beautiful and impactful and meaningful. And if you don't, it might burn you up. And I think that's something that I experience with myself.
What are some of the best channels that you personally have found to be successful for you?
It really doesn't matter that much. Like jiu-jitsu was a thing for a while. I still train jiu-jitsu, but it was very clear, like most energy was going to that. Acro yoga is a thing that I was really into for a while. Really anything like bodybuilding was a thing I was into for a while, weightlifting, just learning new stuff. Anytime that I feel like if I get a new book and I feel like I really like got good information out of it, I'm like, wow, I feel a more evolved version of myself. If I have a good therapy appointment, and I feel like, whoa, like we tapped into some inner child shit that I just didn't even know. I didn't know I was totally disconnected from my 15-year-old boy version of myself. And I was just repressed, stuffed down, like we just jumped over that year. Didn't realize that. So that sensation of progress, I think, is really the thing. It honestly almost doesn't matter. But typically it's like career related is a really big one for me. If I feel career progress, it's really big. And relationship community progress. So I make a new connection with someone that I think is cool. It's typically community and career are the two things that if I feel progress in those two realms, it's like deeply gratifying for me. But that's just where I'm at now as a 35-year-old dude. That would probably, my guess is if I had a kid, it would switch over to progress with my child. If I had, I think things evolve.
It's interesting because so much of what people ask you about, I'm sure on podcasts, is like, how do we get the most out of our movement and our body? And rightly so, because from my perspective, at least, you're an expert in those avenues. But you've kind of moved on, in a sense, to career and relationship with yourself. And it's like, how much are you playing a character of old when you are answering some of these questions? Obviously, you're still living the things that you are doing, but you're also answering from a previous version of yourself.
Sometimes. Typically, I'm pretty. Whatever's going on is what I'll end up infusing into any conversation. When people like I've had several people on my podcast where they have their rote bullet point descriptions of things and they're so well rehearsed. Like sometimes it happened 3 times in this conversation already where I kind of was like, hold on, what were we talking about? Because I'm allowing myself to go into these places that I actually don't know. I haven't been there before. It's very unsafe to explore those parts in a recorded conversation because it's new terrain in a way.
Yeah.
So
we're creating.
To be willing to do that, it's like, it's not for everybody, but so many people that I've had on like that, my whole intention is to like try to kind of misstep them, and like, okay, let's find some new stuff, and they're just, not really willing to do it. But I typically just out of boredom invite new terrain. And I think it is valuable as well to come back to the hits, to the classics, and there are certain things where it's like, for me, if I'm having a conversation with somebody that's meaningful and valuable is are they going to get something from this? And I think if you are really being authentic with yourself, sometimes you get something from a conversation or an experience, and it's not exactly what was in the words. It's more in the way that the words were presented, or the manner that they were presented. So sometimes there's layers behind things. But also I do value providing actionable tips and tricks and things of the sort that people can be like, cool, like, great, I learned that thing about my hips or my ankles or my spine or my nervous system or my breathing or my vision or whatever. So I think a combination of those actionable tips and tricks kind of thing, the bullet points, along with let's venture into some new terrain and, see if something interesting comes up, or maybe not, maybe it's a throwaway thing. You never know with new terrain.
For sure.
Yeah.
I'm curious for you, when did you ever feel most out of alignment in your life?
Out of alignment. I don't know, most out of alignment. I don't know if I have like a most of any sort. I think I think generally if a person's really quote unquote out of alignment, they probably don't realize they're out of alignment. So that's like a value of so I've gone to some AA meetings because my buddy, a very like notable internet kind of person that also does like exercise, fitness, whatever stuff. He has a thing with addiction. He and his girlfriend both do. And I just say that because it's like, it's someone that everybody would look up to, not everybody, but a lot of, millions of people look up to. And then it's like, oh yeah, they're also identify as like, I'm an addict. Like I'm out of control with this thing. I can burn my life up real quick. If I have idle hands. And it's like, whoa, interesting. It's a lot of people wouldn't want to take responsibility for themselves in that way, or really be vulnerable, and come to the place of like, man, like I'm not fully in control of this thing. Like I think I actually need help. Like I need an outside reflection. I need support. That as a man is like a weird thing. It's like I don't think I wasn't really raised being like, oh, that's cool, to be like, I need help. Like this is beyond me. I really need support. But going to something like an AA thing with them is really cool because you're around a bunch of people that are really at that place of just like super obscenely honest, authentic vulnerability, where they're like, I've essentially been blowing my life up for the last 10 years, and I was suicidal, and I messed that up. I couldn't even figure that out. I didn't get the drug cocktail correct. I ruined all my relationships. I ruined my job. I've just been self-sabotaging all these different parts of myself. And I, am in a place now where I'm at rock bottom, and I'm actually now available to actually be able to heal. Whereas a person that is still doing all right, and they're still winning the money game, they're still winning the power and influence game, they're still, winning whatever different versions of like compensations and perhaps addictive behaviors, shielding that culture applauds for them, they'll just keep on running those systems because culture's like, cool, this is good, you're winning, like you made more money, this is awesome. You screwed more people over, you feel even more hollow, and self-destructive inside, but like you got the Lambo, bro. Like you are killing it. Well done. So being around people like that, I think is actually quite gratifying, where it's the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's just like, yeah, like I don't have anything to prove to you or to anybody. I'm not trying. There's no, like the shield is gone, and I'm completely open to, growing from this point. Like I'm in the soil, I'm in the dirt, and I'm open to growing something new from this place. And within that world, they describe addiction as like a spiritual malady. And until a person is tapped into something more than themselves, coming back to like the Darwinian cooperation stuff, until you're tapped into something beyond your individualistic desires and needs and urges and all that stuff, I don't know that there's like a physics to it. I think that individual will feel compulsive behavior and addictive behavior, and they're reaching out for this fuel that's like kindling, but they're not actually getting any logs, or they're reaching out to like high fructose corn syrup, but they're not getting any fat or protein, and they just keep on going through it. But so to get them to a point where you are in that rock bottom place, or just being around that place where we're all in the soil together, and we're growing something new from here, is very gratifying. But I don't know that I've personally felt, come back to the actual question, I don't know that I've personally have like a distinct moment of, I'm in the most misalignment right now. But I could look back at a lot of times where I was generally misaligned and didn't realize it. But I don't think there's been a time in my life that's like, like you could say like, the time that I went to jail for the weed stuff, but it wasn't that big, wasn't that
right.
misaligned. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't think I have a specific story to share on that.
Where and to who are you giving the most currently?
That's interesting. Where and to who? I think I could be giving more, man. I feel like I'm in a place of realizing that I have been giving probably selfishly, like more to myself than would actually heed fulfillment. And I think I'm presently in a kind of like a rite of passage of sorts, or like a dark night of the soul type scenario, where I am coming into awareness of like, goddamn, like I'm a selfish motherfucker. And I've been, I think, destructive to certain relationships and to just myself. And I'm also a lot of other things. I'm also super kind, all kinds of compassionate, all kinds of empathetic. If I ever see a homeless person or a schizophrenic person or any of that, I'm like, I am you, bro. Like, I do not feel any kind of, I'm up here in my ivory tower. I'm like, I'm right here with you, man. Like, I know that you're not that different than me. And the buttons that I have where I'm a little more buttoned up than you, they're hanging by threads. And so that sensation in that way, I think I'm actually a pretty good dude. And I think I also have felt perhaps a certain level of like deep internal scarcity of sorts, perhaps from a young age, particularly around, I think, like love, validation, things of the sort. And I think that has led in some ways to me subconsciously or consciously being mildly manipulative to garner benefits for myself, sometimes at the cost, not necessarily cost. I don't want to hurt anyone, but it's not altruistic why I do certain things. And I can feel subtle manipulation in why I do certain things. And as long as that's imprinted in what you're doing, it's toxic. It's not good. It's not healthy. And so I think that I'm in a place presently where I'm like, like I don't want to do that.
How do you solve that?
No, I think awareness. I think like this, like having like, this is not a sexy thing to talk about. Like me saying these things is kind of like one part of me is you're like, I wonder, people will be like, Aaron's a fucking turd. He's manipulative. He just stated that he's manipulative. So that's, it's, I think being willing to like bring yourself down to the level of the dirt, which this is, you could look at any kind of spiritual text about this as well. All like the conical texts, you know, conical being like they've like lasted the years. It's all about going back to the dirt. You know, and so you can look at that from a biological perspective. You look at that from like a metaphoric, spiritual, psycho-emotional perspective. But going back, like humbling yourself, like your shit stinks. You're not that awesome. And you're brilliant and amazing and special, a snowflake. But you're also like, you're no different than anybody, bro. Get off the righteous pedestal. Like you are no different than anyone. Like get all the way down. Bow down. And now from here, okay, we can build.
You're the shit, but you ain't shit.
You're the shit, but you ain't shit. Yeah, I mean that's like real. That's real stuff. And you won't realize that unless you get the opportunity to get humbled. Like if you're not like in Muslim religion, they go through 5 prayers a day. So they prostrate themselves. They get, you know, all the way down on their knees, essentially go in like a child's pose type thing. I write about that and other traditions in the Align Method book that I did, and just like different religious practices and cultural practices and the way that different cultures, they have these almost like these tuning mechanisms in the way that they live their lives. And that prayer, it's literally like a physical tuning mechanism, you know, but it also every day, you know, it's 12 o'clock, it's 5 o'clock, it's first thing in the morning. You start off like, okay, I bow down. I'm not the shit. I'm not the God figure here. Like I bow down. And you say, okay, cool, sweet. You did that once today. All right, cool. 4 more times. And then tomorrow we'll wake up and we'll do that again. And every moment that you kind of have that reminder.
What's your equivalent of doing that?
Be good to have more of them. I don't know that I have. I think my equivalent is I just regularly remind myself. If I see someone in like harder times than me, particularly like homeless, or like mental pathologies and things of the sort. Though anytime I'm around people like that, or like really old people as well, like anytime I'm really around like anybody that's in a scenario that's like more vulnerable than me, for me is like I think a little prayer in a way, if I'm honest. Yeah, I would say that would be a thing. I meditate, you know, but I don't think that's like, it doesn't really feel like, I think it's more the influence of people that really like gets me. Yeah, so I meditate a couple times a day, but that's like, I don't during that time, I think that's more of just like an observation and like a cleaning, like a clearing. But yeah, probably it would be cool to have more of it, but I think probably realistically it would just, the most apparent times would be the times that I just see someone in need. And I'm just like, oh, who am I to like, you know, be not in that? Why are you there and I'm here? You know, so I think anytime I have that, it kind of does a little hit on me.
And when do you feel most on your pedestal?
I'm on my pedestal. Probably. It varies. I think it's yeah, it's just the same way that I would see a person in need and feel like this compassion for them. As I drift away and kind of, you know, forget about other people, I think just, you know, maybe naturally I'll start to drift more into that. But I typically don't spend a lot of time in like the my shit doesn't stink orientation. It's like that's not a big part of my personality. But sometimes I guess if I do have a little bit of cockiness sometimes in like a gym or something, or like jujitsu or something like that. Yeah, so there is some cockiness definitely does come up, you know, when I'm kind of like, if there's like a physical dominance type situation. But that's just insecurity, I'm pretty sure. Like me feeling into that, it's fine, it's good, it's great. But I think that me like feeding on that sensation of like, oh, I could fucking, you know, whatever. I win in a whatever with this person. I think that's confirming some deeper part that somewhere down there feels like you can't. And now I'm like, I'm like feasting on the moment that I can. But you can always get jacked up. Like, you're never going to be the toughest guy on the planet, you know. And even if you're toughest guy in one particular modality of being tough, there's somebody else that's tougher than you in another modality, and you're just playing by these rules. You know, so if you think that you're the toughest or you think you're the smartest, like, you probably are just either ignorant or afraid to put yourself into more challenging rooms. So you can play your game of being like, oh man, I'm the shit. And it's good for testosterone. And there is a certain value in playing those games with yourself. But hopefully you acknowledge that it is a game and you're not the toughest and you're not the smartest and you're not, you know, the hottest or any of that stuff. It's just relativity. You know, within this room of 14 people, you might be the best, but like, come on, bro.
Yeah, it's a good reminder.
Yeah.
What's been the biggest benefit of therapy?
I think.
How long have you been doing it too? Just for context.
Well, off and on for like the last year, but now I'm doing it more presently because there's like more awareness of shit that needs to be tended to. I think from childhood in particular. I think probably the biggest thing is just awareness of childhood, disconnections I've had with my childhood. And so going through the therapy process and getting to, I'm working with a fellow that particularly does a lot of somatic-based therapy techniques. So it's a lot of like listening into your body, bringing your awareness into your abdomen or your chest, or, you know, and kind of integrating or connecting those felt aspects of your thoughts and feelings with the rest of the body. And that's, I think, the level of disconnect that I've had with certain parts of my younger self would probably be the biggest.
Well, I admire you tremendously for your ability to be so vulnerable in this conversation, to talk about the things that maybe you've stored outside of yourself or just disassociated with. And it really speaks to the level and the depth of your own training in your own mind and your own exploration of yourself. So I'm really grateful for you going through this journey with me today. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for it. Where should we send people to connect with you further? And what do you have on the agenda in the not too distant future that people can get excited about?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I literally have a therapy appointment in like, I think it's either 5 or 5:30. So it's either 30 minutes or an hour. And okay, it's 5:30, so we're good. So I can do a little reorganization of myself. Yes, the most relevant thing is the thing that most everything that we talked about in this was all parts that I do not at all deem myself to be any level of proficiency, expertise, or authority. And where I do lean more into the place that is like my inch wide, mile deep type realm is more around physicality, and self-care and mobility and, you know, making your body function better, more at ease. And so the thing that we've been working on for the last 8 months, really intentionally, is a 6-week program called the Align Method online program. And I'm like absurdly excited about it. And the first week of it is a free trial. So if you want to try the first week, I would recommend that because it's a movement assessment. So you establish a baseline of where is the range of motion of all of your major joints of the body. Most people probably don't even know what full functional range of motion would look like. So we establish that. And then in the first week, we provide mobility fundamentals that you learn from any good physical therapist or manual therapist. Everybody just ought to know how to do these things. It's like contract, relax, and pin and stretch and things of the sort, fascial differentiation. And that's essentially it. There's like a sit, rise test, all that stuff. But the first week's completely free. People can try that. And then from there, you can see if the rest of it is of interest. And that's at alignpodcast.com/AMP, which stands for Align Method Program. And that's the main thing. I'm absurdly excited about that. You know, the throughout the 6 weeks, like the really quick elevator pitch. Week 2 is recovering full functional range of motion of all the joints in the lower body. Week 3 is that of the upper body. Week 4 is connection or integration of the upper and lower body and the left and right. So it gets into a lot of like the rotational pattern stuff that you'd see on my Instagram or YouTube, any of that. Week 5 is nervous system regulation using your vision and your breath. And then week 6 is environment. So you become the shape of your environment, the chairs that you sit in and the couches you sit in and your travel and your office and all of that stuff. That is by far going to be the highest leverage tool that people can engage with to change the shape of their body. And so we break down how to do that. So yeah, that's alignpodcast.com/AMP. There's a book, The Align Method. That's also of value. And podcast called Align Podcast, Instagram's Align Podcast. So that's it. If you're interested in more like stuff, I think the program's great, but then you just type Align Podcast in the internet and that'll pop me up.
All right, real quick. When does that start also?
January 15th.
January 15th. Awesome.
Yeah.
And if you were to say the biggest lever that you teach in the first week or 2 weeks that is going to make an improvement in someone's life, what would that be?
Well,
that they could
the first 2 weeks.
Right now.
Yeah. Well, I think the first biggest lever is knowing where you're at. So in the free trial, you learn where you're at. You're like, oh man, like I didn't realize I lacked range of motion in this part or that part. And so we encourage people to actually take videos of themselves so you can actually see it, and then you can track your progress throughout the span of the 6 weeks and, beyond that as well. And then I would say throughout, the second week is all about recovering full range of motion in the lower body. And the goal would be to be able to get up and down off of the ground without using your hands and be in perfect balance as you're doing it. Achievable by most anyone. And so breaking down education around how to do that, how to recover the range of motion in your joints to be able to do that, and also the strength. And then if you can get to a point where you can comfortably inhabit the ground, and hang out with your kids, hang out with your pets, drink coffee in the ground or whatever, just get up and down off the ground with regularity for the rest of your life. Cultures that spend time on the ground with regularity have minimal to no incidence of osteoarthritis in the hips and the knees, very minimal pelvic floor dysfunction. Fall risk pretty much just isn't a thing because they keep getting up and down off of the ground. That's the number one leading reason for elderly needing assisted living. So if you have parents or grandparents or yourself and you want to be supportive to your future elderly self, just get up and down off of the ground with regularity. It's one of the greatest things you could possibly do for yourself. Your lymphatic fluid gets circulated through muscular contraction. Elevate your legs. If you're gonna lay down on the couch, maybe put your legs up, on the edge, so you have your legs are up above the height of your heart. Maybe do a little contraction with your ankles. A little dorsiplantar flexion is a nice thing. That's been shown. There's been research suggesting that just plantar flexion and dorsiflexion while you're hanging out is helpful with your blood sugar levels, actually processing sugar in your blood. And yeah, so that would be the thing. I think getting up and down off the ground is massive. And then
from literally any position.
So we're launching a 5-day floor sitting challenge that I'm also very excited about. So we're doing that. That's launching January 5th. I don't know when is this going to go out?
It might be the first episode or second episode of 2023. So
cool, sweet.
Wednesday?
Yeah, so people listen to this. So join along for this. This would be a cool thing. That will be a 5-day floor sitting challenge. Just check out my Instagram, and in that I'm going to be breaking down
Align Podcast.
At Align Podcast. Yeah, so I'll be posting. It'll be in the bio and all that stuff. So you can click the link in the bio for that. That's gonna be really cool. So I'm gonna do lives with people each day. We're gonna send an email series actually breaking down the education of each of the videos, and it will be 5 different ways to get up and down off of the ground, some more creative than others, and then 5 different floor sitting positions that are most effective, and teaching you how to do that. For some people, when you're sitting on the ground, it's cool, but this is uncomfortable. Is really simple how to do it right. I've been sitting on the ground this whole entire time for this conversation, which it's not weird. It's not strange. It's actually super efficient. It makes a ton more sense. I've put my legs through. I've been in a 90-90 position. I've been in a straddle position. I've been in a cross-legged position. I've been massaging my feet. This is not a strange thing. And from your perception, I've just been sitting here in a chair like an asshole the whole time. Not that if you sit in the chair, you're an asshole, but comparatively, I'm getting way more work done.
What about standing?
This. Yeah, standing's fine, but standing's still a pretty sedentary range of motion, and it's also not that good for circulation. So if you're standing in place for too long, you're still pulling up blood and lymph and all that stuff way down at the bottom of your body, and your heart is way up higher than that. So when you're sitting on the floor, suddenly it's just gravity. Your legs are closer to your organs. So it's better for digestion. It's better for most things. It's very simple. Like if there's anybody that's claiming to sell something that is really complex and it's like, I can't really quite get it, it's probably not that interesting. Like it's probably hasn't really been hashed out all the way. But most of the things that from my experience and professionally paying attention to this stuff for the last 20 years is it's like it's old, it's simple. Like those are the things that stay. The newfangled, I think fangled is a word, but the new stuff that's like, really fancy and complex and all that stuff, like it doesn't last. So something like this, spending time on the ground throughout the day, it doesn't cost you anything. The only thing that might cost you something is like maybe reading the chapter in the book, or, I have tons of videos online that are completely free about it, or just hang out with a kid. They can teach you, they've got it pretty well established. It's like, those are the things that if you just lean into that, it's going to make the biggest difference in your life, I think.
Yeah. What I love about your advice and the things you put out online are so natural, and it's so obvious once you say them, but the reminders and the way you explain it are so eloquent and they make so much sense. So we didn't dive into a lot of the stuff you've covered on other podcasts talking about movement, but I highly recommend it because I listened to about 10 of those podcasts before doing this one. So thank you so much for your time. All your links are down below. I really appreciate you. I appreciate your time. Hopefully we'll have you on again to talk more about movement, but until next time, I appreciate you.
Thanks, Doug.